Okay, let's talk about stomach acid testing. The very short version, okay? Why do we need it? Well, apparently there's quite a lot there are quite a lot of people out there who have a low level of stomach acid creation, which means that the ability to digest protein, the ability to absorb B12 well, magnesium, calcium, iron, protein, okay? The very basics of the building blocks of life depend on stomach acid to be broken down correctly and absorbed. So stomach acid testing is a very important thing. And I'll be talking about how to do it today. Okay, the post that will come with this video will of course go into greater detail on things that not practical for video. So how do we test for low stomach acid? How do we test stomach acid in general? I mean, theoretically, some people may have high levels of stomach acid. Practically speaking, from my experience at least, very rare. It's been several cases over 30 years. Okay, and all of them were in extreme cases. So what most people will discover is that they have a low stomach acid, and to test that, what we need is 2 meals, preferably lunchtime, each of these meals, not the same day, unless you are a hobbit and you eat very many kinds of and types of, lunch. So today at lunch, tomorrow at lunch, doesn't have to be day after day, but it does have to be separate days for it to be practical. The first day is mostly to make sure that you don't have one of those extreme cases of hyperacidity, or that you don't have any sores inside your esophagus and along your throat or something that could make the second day a bit of a pain and therefore might require preparations before moving from phase 1 to phase 2. On the first day, all you do is you take a medium-sized lemon, you squeeze it, you add water to fill up a classical, cup of water. It doesn't have to be accurate in size. What happens is that volume inside that cup needs to be absorbed by the meal we are going to have it with. Okay, this is a good hearty lunch meal proportionate to your habits, but it does have to have the reasonable volume to be able to absorb the full cup of those liquids. If it's in excess of the amount of food or the amount the food can absorb, it will float over the food inside the stomach and create false positives. So you have to make sure you have a reasonable proportion between the lunch volume and and the kind of foods, obviously, and between the cup of water with a whole lemon juice inside. And the idea is that this meal has to be a protein-based meal, not only protein-based meal. In other words, you want to have a main dish that's protein. It can be vegetable source protein like lentils with whole rice, majadra as it's called in the local cuisine, or you can have tofu, or you can have any other kind of lentils or quinoa. Okay, preferably a whole protein, which means either a grain and a legume, like rice and beans, for instance, or lentils, and or full protein super grains like quinoa or amaranth. Okay, you want to have enough vegetables, perhaps some of them fresh and some of them cooked. You don't want a soup, but again, I get into the more practicals of what kind of meal is good and what kind of meal is not so good in a separate file or in your post, actually, that comes along with this video. And what you want to make sure is that you don't drink soup with it, because otherwise it'll be washing down the digestive juices, watering down the lemon, and therefore not really giving us an accurate picture. And you want to make sure that if you take food from animal sources, protein like fish or meat, etc., then you only want to have regular meats, not fish. Any kind of meat is okay, or eggs, just not hard boiled, please. Let's not kill it, and not, very strongly fried eggs either. Both of them will have their own effect on the stomach acid that will actually make it not so accurate as a test. Fish actually absorbs all the lemon or all the vinegar from the second day, so that's also not a very good idea. It actually totally disrupts the test. And like I said, it has to be a nice whole meal. So if you're having chicken, then you want to have some whole rice next to it, and some vegetables cooked and fresh, etc. You want to have a balanced meal with enough protein to warrant that the stomach will do its best to secrete stomach acid, which happens in response to protein. Now, you put the glass with the lemon juice and you put the plate next to it, and then you start taking a sip of the lemon juice and a bite of the food, digesting it well, of course, chewing it through thoroughly. And you take it once a sip, a bite until you get both of them into your system. Don't overeat, but keep it balanced. And in theory, that should be just fine. I mean, lemon actually adds a lot to a meal. If for any reason this is a very uncomfortable feeling, extremely uncomfortable, not just a little bit, annoying, down the esophagus or even in your throat, stop and don't continue. This will require a separate process to enable this area to heal first, and then you can go back to testing stomach acid. But assuming it went down okay, then you should feel nice and comfortable. And if you feel burning in your stomach, and I'll make sure to point out the location. If these are my ribs, the stomach is on the more left side above the ribs, right underneath the heart. And that's where you're looking for sensations. In the case of lemon juice, it should be just fine. But if in an extreme hyperacidic situation, then you will find it to be burning or very hot there, or even a little heartburn coming up. Very rare, but it can happen. The second time you run this, next day or a few days later, you take a cup of water, same volume more or less, and then you put in a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar or rice vinegar, one of the more wholesome versions. It's still vinegar, so I wouldn't have a lot of it on long term, but for this test, it's fine. And the same kind of meal right next to it, and then again, a sip of this pleasurable vinegar and a bite of the meal. It's going to ruin it, but it's still worth it because knowing whether you have enough stomach acid or not is important. And this time, the result shouldn't be so comfortable. Okay, assuming you have a normal level of stomach acid, this should cause a burning in your stomach and maybe heat sensations and maybe a little heartburn. That is the normal healthy reaction. It's also normal and not necessarily an issue if it burns a little down, going down the hatch. It's not supposed to be painful, but if it burns a little, it's a normal thing. On the way down, it says nothing. It just says you're more or less a normal person. Okay, but if it starts going up, if it starts burning, and I'm talking about during the meal or even 20 minutes after the meal, then that means you have a normal, adequate level of stomach acid. Unfortunately, many people will actually say that was a very comfortable meal. It feels even lighter. You don't feel as heavy after the meal, and very often, totally no interesting symptoms in the chest area where the stomach is. Sometimes there will be all kinds of weird burning sensations in the abdomen, but that's already in the intestines. That's not your stomach, so don't confuse them. And some of these symptoms could actually be additional information for diagnosis, but that goes beyond the scope of this video. So again, you do 1 day with lemon, 1 day with vinegar. Lemon should go fine if all's well, and if it doesn't go well, stop and think. Check what it means, talk to me if you need, and then do what it takes to, prepare for the second phase without hurting yourself. And if the second one comes out okay, then it's time to start talking about treatment for hypohydrochloria, as low stomach acid is called in the professional terms. And make sure you do it right the first time, because if you make all kinds of silly mistakes, like eating soup, like eating fish, like all kinds of other wrong combinations, or doing it at dinner time or first thing in the morning, very often very much more difficult to do it right that way. You will probably need to repeat it, so better to do it right once than 100 times wrong. Catch you later.